Picture, if you will, the candlelit stone chambers of the 13th century. We must cast our minds back to a time when the world was illuminated not by the harsh glare of electricity, but by the flickering, uncertain dance of tallow and beeswax. It is an era where the boundaries between science, magic, and theology are porous, bleeding into one another like ink on parchment. The air in these hidden sanctums is thick, textured with the heavy scent of drying herb hyssop, wormwood, and sage mingling with the metallic tang of molten lead and the acrid bite of sulfur. Outside, the medieval world churns with the noise of feudal life, the clang of the blacksmith's hammer, the tolling of cathedral bells, and the cries of the market. But here, within the thick limestone walls of the alchemist's laboratory, there is only silence, broken by the bubbling of retorts and the scratch of a quill against vellum. In this shadowed space, we find the figure of the seeker. Perhaps it is the Catalan mystic Ramon Llull, a man of intense piety and boundless curiosity, whose mind sought to map the logic of the divine. Or perhaps it is a nameless scholar, a shadowed alchemist whose identity has been eroded by the relentless grinding of time, leaving only the legacy of his hands. He leans over a workbench, scarred by burns and stained with the residues of 1,000 failed experiments. His face, illuminated by the glow of the furnace, is a map of concentration, eyes reflecting the orange light of the fire that burns day and night. He is searching for the quintessence, the fifth element, the spirit hidden within matter, the divine spark that animates the heavy clay of the physical world. He seeks the elixir of life, the philosopher's stone, the substance that will perfect the imperfect and grant humanity a reprieve from the decay of the flesh. The alchemist reaches for a vessel containing the spirit of wine, what we now know as ethanol, distilled and redistilled until it burns with a pure, blue flame. It is the essence of the grape, the fiery heart of the vineyard, captured in glass. In his other hand, he holds a flask of oil of vitriol, a heavy, corrosive liquid derived from green vitriol or iron sulfate. This is sulfuric acid, a substance of biting strength, capable of devouring metal and turning wood to charcoal. It is the dragon of the laboratory, dangerous and potent. In a moment of accidental transmutation, or perhaps guided by a whisper of intuition that feels like the voice of God, he brings these two opposing forces together. He pours the fiery spirit of wine into the biting embrace of the oil of vitriol. The mixture hisses, reacting with a violence that threatens to shatter the glass. Heat radiates from the flask, a chemical fever born of the union. He watches, breath held, as the liquids wrestle and transform. He distills the result, catching the vapors that rise like ghosts from the mixture, guiding them through the cooling coils of the alembic until they condense into a new form. The result is not gold. It is not the red stone of the philosophers. It is not the universal panacea he dreamed of. Instead, dripping slowly from the spout of the condenser, comes a clear, colorless liquid. It looks like water, but it behaves like a living thing. It is restless. It shimmers with a low refractive index, bending the light in strange ways. It refuses to sit still. He unstopper the collection vessel, and immediately the room changes. This is a volatile spirit, boiling in the warmth of a human hand, eager to return to the air from which it seems to have been born. It evaporates with a speed that defies the natural order of water or oil. It is a fugitive substance, always seeking escape. They name it oleum dulce vitrioli, sweet oil of vitriol. Physicians, operating under the ancient theory of the four humors, prescribe it in drops to settle a turbulent stomach or to quiet a persistent cough. They see it as a solvent, a way to extract the essence of other herbs, or a mild sedative to calm the nerves of the hysterical. They do not see the monster of oblivion hiding within the liquid. We must consider the context of pain in these intervening centuries. Pain was the constant companion of the human experience. It was the price of birth, the penalty of disease, and the inevitable conclusion of life. There was no escape from it. A toothache could be a sentence of weeks of agony. A broken bone was a trial of endurance. Surgery was a horrific last resort, a desperate gamble against death, where the cure was often more terrifying than the ailment. The surgeon was not a healer in the modern sense. He was a cutter, a man of iron nerves who could inflict terrible trauma in the name of salvation. We stop talking about spirits and essences and start talking about elements and compounds. In 1540, the German botanist and physician Valerius Cortis rediscovers the substance. He synthesizes it with greater purity, describing it in his work De Artificiosis Extractionibus. He notes its medicinal potential, recommending it for the treatment of pneumonia and pleurisy. He calls it sweet vitriol, praising its ability to relieve pain when taken internally. But still, the leap to anesthesia is not made. Why did it take so long? Why did humanity suffer for hundreds of years while the cure sat on the shelf? Perhaps it was a matter of philosophy. Pain was often viewed as a divine test, a necessary part of the fallen human condition. To remove pain was to interfere with the will of God. Or perhaps it was simply a failure of imagination. As we move into the 18th century, the Age of Enlightenment, the sweet vitriol is renamed. In 1729, the German chemist August Sigmund Frobenius gives it the name ether, from the Greek aether, meaning the upper air, or the clear sky where the gods dwell. It is a fitting name. The substance belongs to the air. It belongs to the heavens. It is too volatile for the earth. In the drawing rooms of the wealthy and the lecture halls of the universities, ether begins to gain a new reputation. It is no longer just a medicine. It is a novelty. It is a scientific trick. Traveling lecturers move from town to town, demonstrating the wonders of pneumatic chemistry. They generate gaseous oxygen, hydrogen, nitrous oxide, and demonstrate their properties to awe-struck audiences. Ether is included in this repertoire. Picture a lecture hall in London or Paris in the late 1700s. The room is packed with gentlemen in powdered wigs and ladies in silk gowns. The lecturer, a man of showmanship as much as science, pours a small amount of ether into a saucer. He invites a volunteer to come forward. He tells them to cup their hands over the saucer and inhale deeply. The audience watches in hushed anticipation. The volunteer breathes in the sweet, heavy fumes. For a moment, nothing happens. Then, a smile spreads across his face. His eyes unfocus. He begins to giggle, a sound that bubbles up from deep within his chest. He sways on his feet. He might shout out a nonsense word, or declare his love for the lecturer, or try to dance a jig. The audience roars with laughter. It is a spectacle. They call it ethereal intoxication. But beneath the laughter, something profound is happening. The volunteer stumbles against a table, striking his shin hard against the wood. The blow is forceful enough to bruise bone. Yet he does not cry out. He does not limp. He continues to laugh, oblivious to the injury. The ether has severed the telegraph line of the nerves. The signal of pain is sent from the leg, but it never reaches the brain. It is intercepted by the fog of the vapor. The audience sees the comedy, they miss the miracle. They see a drunkard's antics, they do not see the suppression of agony. The Frolics continue. Ether becomes a recreational drug for the upper classes, a way to escape the boredom of societal constraints. Young medical students, bored with their anatomy lessons, soak handkerchiefs in the fluid and hold them to their faces, drifting into a euphoric haze in their dormitories. They call these gatherings ether frolics. In these private moments, the angel of anesthesia brushes against humanity, but no one grabs its hand. The students wake up with bruises they cannot explain. They wake up with cuts they do not remember receiving. They joke about the mysterious injuries of the ether. But the connection, the realization that this numbness could be used to silence the scream of the surgical patient, remains elusive. It is one of history's great frustrations. The key to the prison of pain was being used as a toy. We must understand the atmosphere of the time to forgive them. Surgery was performed by speed, not by silence. A good surgeon could amputate a leg in less than a minute. The screams were expected. They were a sign of life. A patient who went silent was a patient who was dying. To intentionally render a patient unconscious, to bring them to the very edge of death, was seen as reckless, dangerous, and unethical. The stupor of alcohol or opium was familiar, but the total oblivion of ether was terrified territory. And so, the volatile spirit waited. It waited through the Napoleonic Wars, where thousands of men had their limbs sawed off on the battlefield, with only a piece of leather to bite on. It waited through the early Industrial Revolution, where factory accidents mangled bodies daily. It waited on the shelves of the apothecaries, in the lecture halls of the chemists, and in the handkerchiefs of the students. It is a tragedy of timing. How many millions suffered while the solution sat in clear sight? How many lives were lost to the shock of pain? The history of ether is a history of missed opportunities, of a humanity so accustomed to suffering that it could not recognize the end of it when it arrived. But nature is patient. The molecule does not care about human history. It simply exists, holding its potential within the vibration of its atoms. It waits for the right mind, the right moment, the right desperation. Let us return to the image of the bottle. A clear, glass-stoppered bottle sitting on a wooden shelf. The light catches the liquid, making it shine like a diamond. Inside, the molecules are bouncing against the glass millions of times a second, trying to escape. They are kinetic. They are alive with energy. Open the bottle in your mind. The sound of the stopper being removed is a soft pop, the hiss of escaping gas. The smell hits you. Sweet, chemical, reminiscent of overripe apples and industrial solvent. It is a smell that will one day haunt the corridors of every hospital on earth. It is the smell of mercy. It is the smell of nothingness. In the dark silence of the pre-anesthetic world, this smell is the only hope. It is the alchemist's dream realized, not as gold, but as something far more valuable. It is the eraser of trauma. It is the pause button on the suffering of the flesh. As the centuries drift by, the bottle moves from the alchemist's dungeon to the chemist's laboratory, and finally, slowly, toward the surgeon's table. The journey is long, the path is winding, but the spirit is persistent. It refuses to be ignored forever. We leave the alchemist now, fading back into the shadows of the 13th century. His retort has cooled. His fire has gone out. But the liquid he distilled remains. It flows like a subterranean river through the history of science, surfacing here and there, a curiosity, a toy, a poison, a medicine. The stage is being set for the awakening. The world is becoming more mechanical, more precise. The Enlightenment has swept away the cobwebs of superstition. Men are beginning to believe that they can master nature, that they can conquer the limitations of the body. The time of the ether frolics is approaching. The drawing rooms are opening their doors, the young men are gathering, and the volatile spirit is ready to dance. But before the laughter, there must be the silence, the deep, expectant silence of a world waiting to exhale, a world burdened by the weight of inevitable pain, unaware that the weight is about to be lifted. Listen to the wind howling outside the alchemist's tower. It carries the dust of the future. It carries the screams of the battlefield and the hush of the operating room. It carries the sweet, heavy scent of the vitriol drifting across the ages, a ghost seeking a body to possess. And in the glass vessel, the liquid swirls, clear, restless, volatile, waiting. The biography of the molecule has only just begun. Its infancy was long and quiet, a slumber of hundreds of years, but its adolescence will be raucous, filled with laughter and stumbling. And its adulthood will change the very definition of what it means to be human. It will divide history into two distinct eras, the time of pain and the time of ether. But for now, in the candlelit stone chamber, it is just a curiosity, a mistake, a byproduct of a quest for gold. The alchemist notes the smell, shrugs, and places it on the shelf. He turns back to his fire, unaware that he has just bottled the most powerful magic the world has ever known. The magic of sleep. The magic of the void. The shadows lengthen. The candle burns low. The spirit waits. Time drifts forward, carried on the sweet, heavy vapors into the age of the Enlightenment in the early 19th century. We must allow the shadowy, candlelit stone chambers of the medieval alchemists to dissolve. The furnaces cool, the alembics are packed away, and the mystic search for the philosopher's stone fades into the more orderly, categorized pursuit of chemistry. The world is becoming a place of taxonomies, of labels, of rational thought. The jagged edges of the Middle Ages are smoothed down into the polished wood and velvet of a new era. We find ourselves now in the drawing rooms of Europe and the growing cities of America. It is a time of waistcoats and pocket watches, of strict social codes and repressed emotions. The air is no longer scented with the brimstone of the dungeon, but with lavender water, coal smoke, and the dust of heavy curtains. And in this civilized, buttoned-up world, the liquid once known as sweet vitriol has found a strange and secret home. It is no longer a mystic secret guarded by a lone seeker. It has been renamed. In 1729, the German chemist August Sigmund Frobenius gave it the name ether, borrowing from the Greek word for the upper air, the pure, rarefied atmosphere that the gods breathed. It was a noble name for a substance that was about to descend into the most ignoble of uses. The liquid is no longer a source of spiritual transmutation, but a source of secret amusement. To understand this chapter of the molecule's life, we must look to the universities. Picture the brick-walled campuses of New England, or the foggy cobblestone precincts of London and Edinburgh. Here, young students gather, aspiring doctors, chemists, the sons of the gentry. They are bored. They are suffocated by the rigidity of their studies and the crushing weight of societal expectation. In a world where every gesture is scrutinized, where laughter is measured and behavior is codified, they crave a release. They crave chaos. And they find it in a glass bottle. They discover that the sweet vitriol, this volatile spirit that sits innocuously on the shelves of the chemistry lecture hall, possesses a euphoric quality unlike anything found in a wine bottle. It is cheaper than whiskey, faster than opium, and leaves no hangover to fog the mind for the morning lecture. It becomes the secret fuel of the ether frolic. Imagine the scene. It is a winter evening in the 1830s. The wind is howling outside, rattling the window panes of a boarding house dormitory. Inside, a fire crackles in the hearth, casting long, dancing shadows against the wallpaper. A group of young men sit in a circle, their collars loosened, their faces flushed with anticipation. One of them produces a bottle. It is clear, indistinguishable from water. But when the stopper is pulled, the room is instantly invaded by that distinct, unmistakable aroma suite, solvent-like, heavy, and cloying. It is the smell of a hospital corridor, though they do not know that yet. To them, it is the smell of rebellion. They do not drink it. They have learned that the stomach rebels against the fire of the ether. Instead, they pour the liquid onto handkerchiefs or sponges. The fluid is cold, ice cold, as it evaporates, drawing the heat from the fabric. They press the damp cloths to their faces, cupping their hands to trap the fumes. They inhale. Let us follow the molecule as it enters the body. It rushes down the trachea, flooding the lungs. Because it is so volatile, it crosses the barrier into the blood with terrifying speed. It races to the brain. In seconds, the world of the drawing room begins to tilt. The ticking of the clock slows down, stretching into a deep, rhythmic booming. The light from the fireplace seems to fracture, splitting into prisms of color. The sounds of the street outside, the clip-clop of horses, the shouting of vendors, fade into a distant, underwater hum. For the student, the sensation is one of profound liberation. The gravity that holds his feet to the floor seems to dissolve. He feels a strange sense of flying while standing still. A euphoria bubbles up from the solar plexus, an unstoppable wave of giggles and absurdity. The strict professor, the difficult exam, the frowning father, all of these heavy realities become weightless, ridiculous concepts. This is the parlor trick. It is a chemical escape used by the youth to dissolve the iron bars of the social code. Under the influence of the vapor, the shyest boy becomes an orator, declaiming poetry to the ceiling. The clumsy boy becomes a dancer, spinning in wild, uncoordinated circles. The serious scholar becomes a jester. But in these moments of intoxication, amidst the laughter and the staggering, a profound biological miracle is occurring, a miracle that goes entirely unnoticed. Watch closely as one of the students, lost in the ether dream, stumbles. He trips over a heavy oak chair. His shin strikes the wood with a sickening thud, a blow that should, by all rights, elicit a cry of agony. The skin breaks, the bone is bruised. But the student does not cry out. He does not even wince. He continues to laugh, picking himself up with a rubbery grace, completely oblivious to the trauma his body has just sustained. Here is the tragic irony that haunts the history of medicine. The profound analgesic nature of the gas is staring them in the face, hidden in the laughter. The cure for the most terrible affliction of humanity, physical pain, is present in the room. It is circulating in their blood. It is numbing their nerves. But they do not see it. They treat the angel of mercy as a party guest. Crowds gather to watch their neighbors act like fools. They watch burly blacksmiths giggle like children. They watch dignified mayors try to fight imaginary enemies. In these shows, the same phenomenon occurs. Men run into benches. They strike walls. They fight. And yet, they show no sign of distress until the gas wears off. There is a famous story of a man who severely injured his leg while chasing an imaginary foe under the influence of nitrous oxide, only to realize he was bleeding only after the gas had cleared. The evidence was piling up. It was accumulating in the bruises and the scrapes of 1,000 frolics and exhibitions. But the paradigm of the era was a fortress. Pain was considered an immutable fact of surgery, a necessary evil, perhaps even a stimulant that kept the patient alive during the trauma of the knife. The idea of anesthesia, a word that did not yet exist in the medical lexicon, was relegated to the realm of quackery and mesmerism. To make a patient unconscious was to bring them too close to the grave. It was dangerous. It was unnatural. And so, ether remained a recreational ghost. It hovered on the edge of the greatest discovery in medical history, waiting for a mind serious enough to stop laughing and start observing. Let us linger for a moment in the atmosphere of these ether frolics. There is a strange, Gothic beauty to them. The Victorian era was obsessed with the hidden, the subconscious, the things that lay beneath the surface of propriety. In the ether high, they touched something of that underworld. The hallucinations were often described as sublime or spiritual. Users felt they had touched the face of God or understood the secret architecture of the universe, only to have the insight vanish the moment they exhaled. The poet Oliver Wendell Holmes, who would later coin the term anesthesia, experimented with ether. In a moment of intoxication, he believed he had grasped the ultimate key to all philosophy. He scribbled it down on a piece of paper with a trembling hand, determined to bring this wisdom back to the waking world. When he sobered up, he rushed to read his revelation. The paper said, "The stench of turpentine prevails throughout." It was a volatile wisdom, slipping through the fingers like the gas itself. But the danger was real. Ether is heavier than air. In the closed drawing rooms, the invisible gas would sink to the floor, pooling like a silent, flammable lake around the ankles of the revelers. If a spark from the fireplace had jumped, if a candle had fallen, the frolic would have turned into an inferno. The molecule demanded respect, even when it was being used for play. It was a dragon in a tuxedo, tolerated only because it seemed so amusing. We must picture the bottle again, corked and sitting on the mantelpiece as the party dies down. The young men are asleep in their chairs, exhausted by the chemical flight. The fire is dying down to embers. The room smells of stale smoke and sweet apples. The ether sits there, clear and patient. It has done its job as an entertainer. But it knows, in the way that inanimate things seem to know their purpose, that it is capable of so much more. It is waiting for the dentist. It is waiting for the surgeon. It is waiting for the moment when someone will look at the painless bruise and ask, "Why?" instead of, "How funny?" The transition from the parlor to the operating theater is not a straight line. It is a stumbling, erratic path. It required men who were desperate, men who were haunted by the screams of their patients. It required a shift in the collective consciousness of the species. We had to decide that pain was not a divine mandate, but a biological problem with a chemical solution. As the 19th century progresses, the pressure builds. The Industrial Revolution is mangling bodies with its machines. The Civil War is looming on the horizon. The screams are getting louder. The need for the angel of mercy is becoming deafening. The jester's mask is beginning to slip. And somewhere in rural Georgia and later in Hartford, Connecticut, the thought begins to form. A young man, perhaps nursing a headache after a frolic, looks at the bottle and thinks, if it can stop the pain of a shin against a table, can it stop the pain of a tooth being pulled? Can it stop the pain of a knife cutting skin? The thought is tenuous, fragile as a smoke ring, but it is there. The volatile spirit is about to be uncorked for a different purpose. The laughter is about to fade, replaced by the heavy, rhythmic breathing of the anesthetized patient. The drawing room is about to give way to the ether dome. But for now, let us leave them in their reverie. Let the vapors swirl in the velvet darkness. Let the young men dream of flying. They are the unknowing pioneers, the test subjects of a revolution they cannot comprehend. They are dancing on the threshold of a new age, an age where the darkness of sleep will become the greatest gift medicine can offer. The ether frolic is the strange, giddy prequel to the serious business of salvation. Time drifts on. The vapors rise. The world sleeps, unaware that it is about to wake up in a place where pain has no name. To understand the miracle of the vapor, we must first descend into the nightmare that preceded it. We must cast our minds back into the terrifying silence of the pre-anesthetic operating theater, a silence that was not the peace of slumber, but the held breath of anticipation before the scream. Before the year 1846, surgery was not the sterile, regulated, and quiet healing art we recognize today. It was a desperate, horrific race against time, a brutal combat between the surgeon's will and the patient's agony. It was a world of necessary cruelty, where the cure felt indistinguishable from the torture, and where the operating table was viewed with the same trembling dread as the executioner's block. Picture, if you will, the architecture of this dread. We find ourselves in London, or perhaps Paris or Philadelphia, in the early 19th century. We enter the operating theater. The name itself is instructive. It was a place of performance, a steep, wooden amphitheater designed not for the comfort of the sick, but for the education of the student and the spectacle of the curious. Rows of semicircular benches rise steeply toward the ceiling, packed with medical students, apprentices, and visiting physicians. They wear street clothes, their boots muddy from the cobblestones outside, their frock coats stiff with the dried blood of previous days, a gruesome badge of honor that signified a busy and successful practice. Down in the center of this pit, illuminated by the cold, natural light of a skylight, for there were no electric bulbs to banish the shadows, stands the table. It is a simple, sturdy wooden structure, often stained dark with the accumulation of years. Beneath it, a box of sawdust sits ready to catch the flow of life that will inevitably spill. The air in this room is thick, textured with a specific and unforgettable miasma. It is a heavy, cloying scent composed of unwashed bodies, the stale smoke of tobacco from the gallery, the sharp, metallic tang of blood, and the sour, primal smell of pure, distilled fear. There is no hum of machines here, no beep of the heart monitor, no hiss of the ventilator. There is only the murmur of the crowd, the shuffling of feet, and the sharp, rhythmic sound of steel being honed against leather. The surgeon prepares his instruments. He lays out the knives, the saws, the tenaculums, and the needles on a velvet cloth. They gleam with a terrifying beauty, forged for a purpose that the human mind recoils from contemplating. Into this Gothic atmosphere walks the patient. Let us imagine a man with a shattered leg, the bone infected, the flesh gangrenous, or perhaps a woman with a tumor growing in her breast. They do not arrive on a rolling gurney in a twilight of sedation. They walk, or are carried, fully awake, fully aware, their senses heightened by the adrenaline of terror. They have spent the previous night in a sleepless vigil, listening to the church bells toll the hours, knowing that when the sun reaches its zenith, the knife will descend. The psychological weight upon the patient in these moments is a burden almost too heavy to bear. They know what is coming. There is no mystery, only the stark, blinding reality of pain. They are asked to climb onto the wooden table. They lie down, and then the ritual of restraint begins. Because there is no sleep to keep the body still, there must be force. Leather straps are buckled across the chest and the thighs. The strong men assistants, employed solely for their physical power, step forward. They are not healers in the delicate sense. They are jailers of the limb. They grip the patient's arms and legs with iron hands. Their job is simple and brutal: to prevent the reflex of the body to pull away from the source of pain. They are the anchors in a storm of agony. The surgeon steps up to the table. In this era, he is a figure of complex duality. He is a savior, yes, but he is also a source of terror. He is judged not by his delicacy nor by his bedside manner, but by a single, ruthless metric: his speed. In a world without anesthesia, time is the enemy. Every second the knife is in the flesh is a second of shock, a second of trauma that pushes the patient closer to death. Therefore, the greatest surgeons are the fastest. Consider the legendary Robert Liston, the fastest knife in the West End. He was a giant of a man, 6 feet 2 inches tall, known to operate in a bottle green coat and Wellington boots. He would spring into the operating theater like a duelist, shouting to the students in the gallery, "Time me, gentlemen, time me!" He could amputate a leg in 28 seconds. Imagine the violence required for such speed. The flash of the knife, the rapid sawing motion through the bone, the tying of the arteries. It was a blur of motion, a feat of grim athleticism. But for the patient, those 28 seconds were an eternity, a dilated epic of suffering where every nerve ending screamed in unison. There was no sleep here, only the raw, unmediated experience of the knife. Patients would sometimes be given a glass of brandy or wine, a feeble attempt to dull the senses. But alcohol is a vasodilator. It opens the blood vessels, making the bleeding worse, and its sedative effects are negligible against the searing reality of amputation. Others were given opium, the milk of the poppy. But while opium could induce a dreamy lethargy for a toothache or a cough, it could not block the sharp, acute transmission of nerves being severed. It merely made the patient a stoned witness to their own torture. And so, they bit down. The phrase, "bite the bullet," comes from the battlefield, where soldiers would clamp their teeth on a lead musket ball to keep from screaming. In the hospital, they bit on leather straps or wooden blocks. They squeezed the hands of the assistants until their own knuckles turned white. They stared up at the skylight, trying to detach their minds from the devastation occurring below. We must pause to consider the perspective of the surgeon in this dark theater. It is easy to paint them as butchers, as men desensitized to suffering. But the historical record tells a more tragic story. These were men of science and compassion, trapped by the limitations of their age. They had to steel their hearts. They had to erect a fortress of coldness around their souls to do what was necessary. The great Scottish surgeon Charles Bell was known to suffer from profound melancholy before operations. He would pace his study, sick with dread. The renowned William Cheselden, one of the finest cutters of the 18th century, would often vomit before entering the theater, his body rejecting the violence he was about to inflict. They hated the pain. They hated the screams. They knew that to save the life, they had to break the body, and they had to do it while the patient looked them in the eye. There is a profound intimacy in this pre-anesthetic trauma. The surgeon and the patient were locked in a terrible embrace. The surgeon could hear the patient's breathing, quick and shallow. He could hear their prayers, their begging, their bargaining with God. "Stop, please, stop," was the chorus of the operating room. And the surgeon had to harden himself, to shut his ears, to treat the pleading human being as an object to be fixed. He had to become a machine. This dissociation was the only way to survive the profession. Many brilliant medical students, possessed of steady hands and sharp minds, walked out of their first amputation and never returned, unable to bear the agony of the knife. Let us witness a specific scene to truly grasp the gravity. We travel to the year 1811, to the home of the famous novelist Fanny Burney. She has been diagnosed with breast cancer. The greatest surgeons of France, including the Baron Larrey, Napoleon's own surgeon, have been summoned. There is no hospital. The surgery happens in her parlor. She writes of the experience in a letter that remains one of the most harrowing documents in medical history. She describes the arrival of the surgeons, 7 men in black, solemn as undertakers. She describes the preparation of the room, the laying out of the lint and the bandages. She is given a wine cordial, which she drinks, knowing it is useless. She is asked to lie on a bed in the center of the room. A cambric handkerchief is placed over her face, not to put her to sleep, but to spare her the sight of the knife. But she can see through the thin fabric. She sees the glint of the steel. She sees the hand of the surgeon, Baron Larrey, ascending. And then, the cut. "I mounted a scream that I think lasts to this day," she wrote. "I screamed uninterruptedly during the whole time of the incision, so excruciating was the agony." She describes feeling the knife grating against her ribs. She describes the sensation of the air entering the wound, a coldness in the center of her chest. She describes the surgeons working, their faces pale, tears in their eyes, yet their hands moving with relentless purpose. She did not faint. She remained conscious through the removal of the tissue, the tying of the arteries, the stitching of the skin. She felt every thread. When it was over, she was lifted back into her bed. The surgeons, these men of iron, were shattered. They drank the wine intended for her. They wept. They were exhausted by the shared trauma of the event. Fanny Burney survived, living another 29 years, but the shadow of that hour never left her. It was a trauma etched into her very soul, a memory of pain so absolute it defied language. This was the reality of the healing art. It was a paradox. To cure, one had to inflict torture. To save, one had to destroy. The laudable pus, the surgical fever, these were the expected aftermaths. But the primary hurdle, the great wall that stood between humanity and the advancement of medicine, was pain. Pain limited everything. It limited how deep a surgeon could go. It limited how long he could take to be precise. Intricate procedures inside the abdomen or the chest were impossible, not just because of infection, but because the patient would die of shock on the table. The body simply could not withstand the trauma. Surgery was confined to the surface, to the extremities, to the desperate removal of what was already dead or dying. Philosophers and theologians of the time debated the nature of this suffering. Some argued that pain was a vital force, a necessary stimulant that kept the heart beating during trauma. Others argued that it was the result of original sin, a divine decree that humanity must suffer in the flesh. To remove pain was seen by some as an act of hubris, a violation of the natural order. When the idea of painless surgery was first whispered, there were those who called it unnatural and dangerous. But the human body cried out against this philosophy. The scream of the patient was the refutation of the dogma. The sheer, visceral horror of the operating room created a pressure, a desperate, palpable longing for a savior. The world was waiting. The surgeons, washing the blood from their hands and trembling with fatigue, were waiting. The patients, lying in their beds, staring at the ceiling, dreading the morning light, were waiting. They were waiting for a void. They were waiting for a place where the mind could go while the body was broken. They were waiting for the volatile spirit to step out of the drawing room frolics and into this chamber of horrors. Imagine the contrast. On one side we have the ether frolic, the laughter, the lightness, the bruised shins ignored in a haze of euphoria. On the other side we have the agony of the knife, the screams, the straps, the terror. These two worlds existed simultaneously, separated only by a failure of imagination. The solution to the nightmare was floating in the very air of the university lecture halls, hidden in the novelty of the laughing gas shows. The tragedy is that the connection took so long to make. How many legs were sawed off while the bottle of ether sat on a shelf a few streets away? How many women suffered like Fanny Burney while students giggled into ether-soaked handkerchiefs? The timeline of history is filled with these near misses, these moments where the cure sits silently beside the affliction, unrecognized. But the pressure was building. By the 1840s, the atmosphere in the surgical world was approaching a breaking point. The intellectual curiosity of the Enlightenment, combined with the humanitarian impulse of the age, created a fertile ground for revolution. Men were beginning to question the inevitability of suffering. They were beginning to ask, what if? What if the sleep of the frolic could be deepened? What if the numbness of the bruised shin could be extended to the severed limb? What if the sweet vitriol was not just a toy, but a key? We are standing on the precipice of the change. The darkness of the pre-anesthetic era is at its deepest. The agony of the knife has reached its crescendo. The stage is set. The actors are in place. The horror has gone on long enough. In the next chapter, we will see the spark. We will see the mind of a dentist, haunted by the pain of his patients, bridge the gap. We will see the volatile spirit lifted from the shelf and carried into the light. But let us never forget the darkness we are leaving behind. Let us honor the memory of those who endured the knife without the sleep. Their suffering is the foundation upon which our modern comfort is built. They walked through the valley of the shadow of death so that we might sleep through the cutting. The silence of the operating theater is about to change. The terrified silence of anticipation is about to be replaced by the heavy, rhythmic, miraculous silence of anesthesia. The era of the scream is ending. The era of the ether is about to begin. The narrative shifts now, moving away from the blood-soaked theaters of London and the velvet-draped salons of Paris. We cross the gray, churning Atlantic to the rocky coast of New England, to a young, ambitious, and restless nation. It is the mid-1840s. The air here is crisp with the scents of autumn leaves and the salty tang of the harbor. We find ourselves in the city of Boston, a place of red brick, gas lamps, and a growing intellectual fervor. But we are not entering the halls of a great university, nor the mansion of a wealthy merchant. We are entering a place of specific and intimate dread, a dentist's office. To understand the mind of William T.G. Morton, the man at the center of this chapter, we must first understand the unique horror of his profession in the 19th century. The dentist was a figure of fear, a man whose arrival signaled the beginning of a torture session. In an era before fluoride and modern hygiene, the rotting of teeth was a universal affliction, a slow, throbbing decay that spared neither the rich nor the poor. The only cure was extraction, and extraction was a brutal affair of pliers, leverage, and brute force, often resulting in the fracturing of the jaw and the shattering of the patient's spirit. Morton was a man haunted by this problem. He was not a philosopher like the alchemists of old, nor a poet like Baudelaire. He was a practical man, a hustler in the American sense, driven by a complex mixture of humanitarian impulse and a desperate hunger for wealth and acclaim. He looked at the empty chair in his office, a chair that patients would avoid until the pain of the tooth outweighed the terror of the pull, and he saw a failure of science. He saw a barrier to his own success. The laughing gas is too flighty, too light, too difficult to control. It cannot hold the darkness at bay. It allows the demon of pain to slip through the cracks. Morton needs something heavier. He needs a sledgehammer, not a feather. He turns his gaze to the bottle of ether. He knows of the substance. He has spoken with the chemist Charles Jackson, a man of vast knowledge and even vaster arrogance, who has mentioned the numbing qualities of sweet vitriol. Morton remembers the stories of the ether frolics, the bruised shins that went unnoticed. But he is not interested in the frolic. He is interested in the void. Picture the solitude of his office at 19 Tremont Row. It is late at night. The city outside is quiet, save for the occasional rattle of a carriage on the cobblestones. The gas lamps hiss softly in the room, casting long, wavering shadows against the walls lined with terrifying steel instruments. Morton is alone. He is about to cross a threshold that no human being has consciously crossed with the intent of return. He begins with the lower orders of life. He catches a spaniel, a small, trembling dog. He forces the animal to breathe the ether fumes. The dog struggles, then goes limp. It lies there, to all appearances, dead. Morton watches, his heart hammering against his ribs. Is it a poison? Has he killed the creature? He waits. The minutes stretch out like hours. Then, a twitch. A whimper. The dog scrambles to its feet, shakes its head, and barks. It is alive. It has traveled to the land of the dead and returned. But a dog is not a man. The physiology of the human mind is a darker, deeper ocean. Morton knows that to prove the safety of the spirit, he must submit to it himself. He must become both the scientist and the subject. Visualize the moment of suspension. It is September 30th, 1846. Morton locks the door of his office. He does not want to be disturbed. He does not want to be found dead by a patient. He takes a high-grade sulfuric ether, purified to remove the acids that would burn the lungs. He takes a simple marine sponge, the skeleton of a sea creature, porous and absorbent. He saturates the sponge with the clear, volatile liquid. The smell fills the small room immediately, that sweet, chemical, overripe scent that we have followed from the alchemist's dungeon. He sits in his operating chair. He leans his head back against the headrest, the leather cold against his neck. He looks at his own reflection in the glass of the cabinet opposite him. He is terrified. He is afraid that the ether will stop his heart. He is afraid that he will simply drift away and never wake up, another casualty of the quest for the unknown. But the ambition drives him. The memory of the screaming patients drives him. He brings the sponge to his face. He cups his hands around it, creating a seal. He inhales. The first breath is harsh. The vapor catches in his throat, triggering a cough. But he forces himself to continue. He breathes in deeply, pulling the heavy gas down into the alveoli of his lungs. The molecule enters his blood. It races to the brain. The world around him begins to dismantle itself. The ticking of the clock on the mantel, which had been a steady rhythmic tick-tock, begins to slow down. Tick. Tock. The sound stretches out, becoming a deep, booming resonance. The hiss of the gas lamp becomes a roar, like a waterfall in the distance. The visual field begins to tunnel. The edges of his vision darken, encroaching on the center. The light turns a strange, vibrating yellow. He feels a numbness starting in his toes, rising up his legs like a tide of cold water. His hands, gripping the armrests of the chair, feel distant, as if they belong to someone else. He tries to move a finger, and the command is sent, but the signal is lost in the fog. He sinks deeper into the chair. The fear evaporates, replaced by a profound, heavy indifference. He is drifting. He is floating on a dark river. He loses consciousness. The sponge falls from his hand. His head lolls to the side. For a period of time measured by the clock as 8 minutes, but by the mind as an eternity, William Morton does not exist. He is a biological machine, breathing and beating, but the I, the ego, the sufferer, is gone. He is in the void. Then, the return. It is not sudden. It is a slow ascent from the bottom of the ocean. Light breaks through the darkness. Sound returns, rushing in with a disorienting clamor. He gasps. He opens his eyes. He is back in the room at Tremont Row. The clock is still ticking. He is alive. He looks at his hand. He pinches his own thigh hard. He feels it. The sensation has returned, but he knows, with a certainty that shakes him to his core, that for those 8 minutes he could have been cut, burned, or broken, and he would not have known it. He has found the key. He has held the dragon's leash. But a self-experiment is only a hypothesis. He needs a patient. He needs a human being in pain. As if summoned by the fates, the doorbell rings later that very evening. It is a man named Eben Frost, a music teacher with a face swollen by an infected bicuspid. He is in agony. He is terrified of the extraction, but the pain has driven him to the dentist's door at this ungodly hour. "I will pay anything," Frost says, holding his jaw. "If you can only stop the pain. Mesmerize me, do anything." Morton looks at him. He sees the fear that he intends to banish from the world. "I have something better than mesmerism," Morton says softly. He wets the handkerchief. He tells Frost to breathe. Frost, desperate and trusting, inhales the fumes. In moments, his head drops. He is unconscious. Morton picks up his forceps. The metal is cold. He approaches the open mouth. He clamps the instrument onto the rotting tooth. He applies the torque. The root tears from the gum. It is a violent act. Frost does not move. He does not scream. He does not stiffen. He sits as still as a corpse. Morton drops the bloody tooth into a metal basin. The sound, clink, is the only noise in the room. He waits. Frost begins to stir. He blinks, looking around confusedly. He sees Morton standing over him. "When are you going to pull it?" Frost asks. Morton smiles. He points to the basin. It is already done. Frost is astounded. He trembles, not with pain, but with the shock of the miraculous. He has walked through the fire and not been burned. He signs a certificate on the spot, attesting to the fact that he felt no pain. It is the first documented proof of surgical anesthesia in history. Morton is elated, but his ambition is a hungry beast. He knows that pulling a tooth is a minor victory. To truly conquer the world, to truly secure his fortune, he must conquer the operating room. He must succeed where Horace Wells failed. He must take his discovery to the high altar of American medicine, the Massachusetts General Hospital. But there is a problem. The sponge. It is messy. It is wasteful. It dries out too quickly. It is unscientific. If he walks into the hospital with a wet rag, they will laugh him out of the room. He needs a device. He needs a machine that gives him control over the volatile spirit. He works feverishly. He sketches designs. He consults with glassblowers. He creates an object that looks like something from a darker, stranger science. It is a glass globe, roughly the size of a large apple. It has 2 necks. One opening is for the air to enter, passing over the ether-soaked sponge inside. The other opening is a mouthpiece, equipped with a leather flap-a-crude valve to ensure the patient inhales the vapor and exhales into the room. It is a glass lung. It is beautiful and terrifying. It is a vessel designed to deliver oblivion. Morton is also a businessman. He knows he cannot patent a smell. He cannot patent a natural element. So he obscures the truth. He adds dyes to the ether to change its color. He adds aromatic oils to mask the smell. He gives it a new name. He calls it Letheon. The name is a stroke of poetic genius. In Greek mythology, the river Lethe flowed through the underworld of Hades. It was the river of forgetfulness. The souls of the dead were required to drink from it to erase the memories of their earthly lives before they could be reincarnated. Morton is offering a bottle of water from that river. He is selling the power to forget the present moment. He writes to Dr. John Collins Warren, the senior surgeon at Massachusetts General Hospital. Warren is a man of the old guard, a man who has operated on thousands of screaming patients. He is skeptical, stern, and intimidating. But he is also desperate. He has seen enough suffering. He reads Morton's letter, which promises a way to render surgery painless. He remembers the failure of Wells, but his curiosity, and perhaps a flicker of hope, wins out. He sends a reply. The invitation. Morton is invited to demonstrate his Letheon on Friday, October 16, 1846. The night before the demonstration, Morton barely sleeps. He is tweaking the inhaler. He is pacing the floor. He knows the stakes. If he fails, he will be ruined. He will be branded a charlatan, a quack, a snake oil salesman. But if he succeeds, he will change the course of human history. He will divide time into before and after. The morning of the 16th dawns cold and gray. The autumn light filters through the trees of the Boston Common. Morton dresses in his finest suit. He packs the glass globe carefully in a velvet bag. He takes the bottle of Letheon. He steps out into the street. The city is bustling. Men in top hats walk to their banks. Women in hoop skirts walk to the market. They are oblivious to the fact that a man is walking among them carrying the end of pain in a bag. They do not know that the screams that drift from the hospital windows, a sound woven into the background noise of the city, are about to be silenced. Morton walks toward the bullfinch building of the hospital. He looks up at the great granite facade, the pillars, the dome. It looks like a temple, and indeed, it is. It is the temple of the body, where the high priests of surgery perform their bloody rites. He is late. The inhaler required a last-minute fix from the instrument maker. He runs up the steps, his breath coming in short gasps. He enters the building. The air inside smells of old wood and sickness. He climbs the stairs to the surgical amphitheater under the dome. His heart is pounding, not from the exertion but from the gravity of the moment. He is walking toward destiny. He is walking toward the most skeptical audience in the world. He clutches the glass globe tighter. Inside that globe is the volatile spirit. It is the breath of the alchemist. It is the laughter of the student. It is the silence of the void. Morton pauses at the door. He takes a deep breath of the air of the waking world, the air of pain and sensation. Then he pushes the door open. The room is waiting. The patient is waiting. The knife is waiting. The dentist steps onto the stage, and the sponge is ready to meet the surgeon. The history of the world is about to hold its breath. It is the 16th day of October, in the year of our Lord 1846. The autumn air in Boston is crisp, carrying the scent of fallen maple leaves and the salt of the Atlantic harbor, a cooling wind that rattles the window panes of the city. We find ourselves standing before the imposing granite facade of the Massachusetts General Hospital. It is a temple of healing, designed by the great architect Charles Bulfinch, a structure of pillars and stone meant to evoke the rationality and order of the Enlightenment. But inside, up the winding stairs, beneath the central copper-clad dome, lies a room that has, until this morning, been a chamber of horrors. We enter the surgical amphitheater. It is a space that feels more like a courtroom or an inquisitor's chamber than a place of mercy. The room is circular, rising steeply in tiered rows of wooden benches, designed so that the maximum number of eyes can look down into the pit below. This is the Ether Dome, though it does not yet bear that name. Today, it is simply the operating theater, a place where the grim business of amputation and excision is performed before a live audience. The atmosphere in the room is thick, textured with a specific kind of tension. It is the tension of men who have seen too much pain to be optimistic. The benches are packed. There are grave, bearded physicians in frock coats, men who have spent decades hardening their hearts against the screams of their patients. There are medical students, young and raucous, their boots scuffing the floorboards, their voices a low hum of cynicism. They have come to watch a show. They have come to witness another failure, another humbug claim of painless surgery. They remember the humiliation of Horace Wells only a year prior. They remember the groans of the patient who was promised oblivion but received only confusion. They are armed with skepticism, ready to jeer at the first sign of a flinch. They check their pocket watches. They whisper to one another, trading jokes to mask the underlying anxiety that permeates the profession, the anxiety of inflicting torture in the name of a cure. Down in the center of the pit, illuminated by the cold, unforgiving natural light pouring in through the great skylight of the dome, sits the patient. His name is Gilbert Abbott. He is a young man, a printer by trade, only 20 years old. He is thin, pale, and terrified. He sits in a red velvet operating chair, a plush, incongruous piece of furniture that looks like it belongs in a parlor, yet is stained with the invisible memories of 1,000 previous struggles. Abbott has a congenital vascular malformation tumor on the left side of his neck, just below the jaw. It is a pulsing, swollen mass. He knows that to remove it, the surgeon must slice deep into the delicate tissues of the neck, navigating a minefield of nerves and arteries. He knows, because society has taught him, that this will be an ordeal of fire. He expects to be held down. He expects to scream until his voice gives out. He grips the arms of the red chair, his knuckles white, his eyes darting around the room, looking at the faces of the men who have come to watch him suffer. Standing beside him is the surgeon. He is a giant of American medicine, Dr. John Collins Warren. He has lost his nerve. The tension in the room shifts from anticipation to annoyance. Warren checks his watch. He looks at the terrified boy in the chair. He decides he cannot prolong the patient's anxiety any longer. He turns to the audience. His voice is dry and commanding. "As Dr. Morton has not arrived," he announces, "I presume he is otherwise engaged." The words are a dismissal. They are a judgment. Warren picks up his scalpel. He gestures to the strong menth assistants whose job is to hold the patient down to take their positions. Abbott braces himself. The audience leans in, ready for the familiar ritual of the scream. But then, a sound at the door. The heavy oak door bursts open. William T.G. Morton rushes in. He is breathless, his face flushed, his hair disheveled. He is carrying a strange object in his hands, a glass globe with a brass fixture and a wooden mouthpiece. He has been delayed by the instrument maker, frantically fixing a valve at the last minute. He runs down the stairs into the pit, ignoring the glares of the students. The room falls silent. The interruption is so dramatic, so desperate, that it halts the surgery. Warren pauses, the knife hovering inches from Abbott's neck. He looks at the young dentist. He looks at the strange glass contraption. He steps back, a gesture of cold challenge. "Well, sir," Warren says, his voice dripping with icy sarcasm, "your patient is ready." Morton nods. He is trembling, not with fear of the crowd, but with the magnitude of what he is about to attempt. He steps up to the red velvet chair. He looks at Gilbert Abbott. He sees the terror in the young man's eyes, the universal terror of the human species facing pain. "Are you afraid?" Morton asks softly. "No," Abbott lies, his voice shaking. "I feel confident, I think." Morton uncorks the device. He pours the clear, volatile liquid, the lithion, the sweet vitriol, into the sponge inside the globe. The smell immediately begins to drift out, reaching the noses of the men in the front row. It is a strange, chemical sweetness, heavy and cloying, unlike anything they have smelled in an operating room before. It masks the scent of fear. Morton places the mouthpiece between Abbott's lips. "Breathe deeply," he instructs. "Deep, slow breaths." Abbott obeys. He draws the vapor into his lungs. Visualize the physiology of this moment. The ether molecules, liberated from the glass prison, rush down the trachea. They cross the delicate membrane of the alveoli and enter the bloodstream. They are pumped by the beating heart, which is hammering in Abbott's chest directly to the brain. In the brain, the ether begins its mysterious work. It acts on the lipid membranes of the nerve cells. It quiets the electrical storms of consciousness. It interrupts the telegraph line that carries the signal of pain from the skin to the soul. Abbott's eyes widen for a moment, then begin to glaze over. The room around him, the steep benches, the staring faces, the stern figure of Warren begins to blur. The sounds of the hospital fade into a rhythmic, underwater throbbing. A heaviness settles in his limbs. His head droops to the side. His breathing becomes deep and rhythmic, like a man in a profound sleep. He slides into the chemical abyss. He has gone to a place where no patient has ever gone before. A sanctuary within his own mind, a void protected by the vapor. Morton watches him closely. He lifts Abbott's hand and lets it drop. It falls limp, like a dead weight. There is no resistance, no reflex. Morton turns to the surgeon. "Your patient is ready, sir." The words hang in the air. Warren looks at the sleeping boy. He looks at Morton. He is still skeptical, but he is a professional. He steps forward. He raises the scalpel. The audience holds its breath. This is the moment of truth. They know what happens next. When the steel breaks the skin, the body revolts. The patient screams. The patient struggles. The strong men must throw their weight upon the limbs. Warren brings the knife down. He makes a 3-inch incision along the jawline. The skin parts. The blood flows. The silence in the room is deafening. There is no scream. There is no struggle. Gilbert Abbott does not flinch. He does not cry out. He lies as still as marble, his chest rising and falling in a slow, peaceful rhythm. The only sound is the soft shh of the knife cutting through tissue and the ticking of the clock. A shock wave of disbelief travels through the benches. The students lean forward, their mouths open. The doctors adjust their spectacles, sure that their eyes are deceiving them. This is impossible. This violates everything they know about the human body. To be cut is to suffer. To suffer is to scream. But Abbott sleeps. Warren continues. He is a master surgeon, and he works with speed. He dissects the tissues, exposing the vascular tumor. He passes a curved needle through the flesh to ligate the mass. This is a procedure that should be excruciating, deep, visceral pain. But still, the patient is silent. For the first time in history, the operating theater is not a torture chamber. It is a place of quiet work. The focus shifts from the struggle to the anatomy. Warren can take a moment to be precise. He does not have to fight the patient. The strong men stand by, their hands useless at their sides, witnessing a redundancy they cannot comprehend. The minutes tick by. The tumor is removed. The wound is stitched closed. The blood is wiped away. Only then does Abbott begin to stir. The ether is wearing off. The veil is lifting. He groans softly, moving his head. His eyes flutter open. He looks up, groggy, confused, resembling a man waking from a deep nap on a Sunday afternoon. He looks at Warren. He looks at the crowd. He looks at the bandage on his neck. "Did you feel anything?" Warren asks, his voice uncharacteristically gentle. Abbott blinks. He speaks slowly, his words thick. "I felt a scratching," he murmurs. "Like my neck was scratched by a hoe." He felt a scratch. He did not feel the knife. He did not feel the needle. He felt a scratch. The realization hits the room like a physical blow. The impossible has happened. The barrier of pain has been breached. The ancient curse of suffering has been lifted by a glass globe and a sponge. John Collins Warren stands there, the bloody scalpel still in his hand. He looks at the boy. He looks at the stunned audience. This man, the symbol of the old order, the man who believed that pain was the inevitable price of surgery, begins to weep. Tears likely well in his eyes, a release of 50 years of accumulated trauma of having to hurt to heal. He turns to the rows of students. The cynicism is gone. The skepticism has evaporated into the ether-filled air. He straightens his back, and in a voice that trembles with emotion, he utters the words that will be carved into the bedrock of history. "Gentlemen," he says, "this is no humbug. Pandemonium erupts, but it is a quiet, reverent pandemonium. The doctors rush down to the floor. They surround Abbott. They touch the inhaler. They stare at Morton as if he were a magician who has just pulled the sun out of a hat. Another surgeon, the eminent Dr. Henry Bigelow, steps forward. He looks at the scene, the sleeping patient, the weeping surgeon, the trembling dentist. He turns to a colleague and whispers a prophecy that is truer than he can possibly know. "We have seen something today," Bigelow says, "that will go round the world." And indeed, the news is already leaving the room. It is seeping out of the ether dome, down the stairs, out into the streets of Boston. It will travel by telegraph, by ship, by letter. It will cross the oceans. It will reach London, Paris, Vienna. The era of agony is over. The silence of the dome is the silence of a new age. It is the silence of mercy. Consider the profundity of this shift. For all of human history, from the first stone tools of the Neolithic era to this very morning in 1846, surgery was synonymous with torture. A diagnosis of a tumor, a shattered bone, a gangrenous limb was a sentence to a hell on earth. There was no escape. But in the span of 30 minutes, in a room smelling of sweet vitriol, the definition of the human experience changed. The link between damage and pain was severed. The soul was given a hiding place. Morton stands to the side, exhausted. He clutches his inhaler. He has won. He has conquered the pain. But he does not yet know the price he will pay for this victory. He does not know that the ether controversy will consume his life. He only knows that the boy in the chair is smiling. The red velvet chair, once a throne of terror, has become a bed of dreams. As the room slowly empties, the smell of the ether lingers. It drifts up into the dome, trapped against the copper ceiling. It is the incense of a new religion, the religion of anesthesia. It is a scent that says, "You do not have to suffer, you can sleep, and when you wake, you will be whole." The silence of the dome echoes through time. It is a silence that we, the beneficiaries of this moment, still enjoy. Every time we drift off under the lights of a modern operating room, counting backward from 10, we are traveling back to that October morning. We are sitting in the chair with Gilbert Abbott. We are breathing the breath of the alchemist. We are entering the silence that was bought for us by a dentist, a sponge, and a volatile spirit. But the story does not end in triumph. The spirit of the ether is volatile in more ways than one. It brings peace to the patient, but it brings chaos to the discoverer. As the news spreads, so too does the envy, the greed, and the madness. The poisoned chalice is about to be passed. As the news of the miracle spreads across the world, traveling by ship and telegraph, a tragic irony begins to fester in the lives of the men who discovered it. We must watch now as the silence of the dome ripples outward, transforming into a roar of acclaim that circles the globe. The story of Gilbert Abbott and the glass globe leaves Boston like a ship catching a gale. It travels down the Atlantic coast to New York and Philadelphia. It crosses the ocean, carried in the mailbags of steamships, arriving in London in December of 1846. There, the great surgeon Robert Liston of the 28-second amputation receives the letter. He reads it to his students, his voice trembling with a mixture of hope and disbelief. "We are going to try a Yankee dodge today, gentlemen," he announces. He amputates a leg using ether. The patient wakes up and asks when the surgery will begin. The room erupts. It is as if the universe requires a balance. For the millions of hours of pain removed from the collective human experience, a heavy toll of suffering must be extracted from the discoverers. The conflict begins with a patent. William Morton, the dentist who held the inhaler, is a man of commerce as much as science. He sees the lithion not just as a cure, but as a product. He secures a patent, attempting to restrict the use of the discovery to those who pay him a royalty. He wants to own the sleep. But the medical establishment revolts. They argue that pain relief is a gift from God to humanity, not a commodity to be licensed. Lithion is revealed to be simple sulfuric ether, a common chemical available in any apothecary. The patent becomes unenforceable. Morton is painted not as a savior, but as a greedy monopolist. But the true poison lies in the question of credit. Who really discovered it? Enter Charles T. Jackson. He is the chemist, the geologist, the man of high society and Harvard pedigree. He claims that he gave Morton the idea. He claims that Morton was merely his hands, a technician acting on the instructions of a superior mind. Jackson is a man of brilliant intellect but a corrosive ego. He writes letters to the Academy of Sciences in Paris. He whispers in the ears of politicians. He launches a campaign to erase the dentist from history and claim the laurel wreath for himself. He views the ether as his intellectual property, stolen by an uneducated usurper. And then, the tragic figure of Horace Wells reemerges from the shadows. The man who was hissed out of the Harvard lecture hall in 1845 watches the rise of ether with a broken heart. "He was the first," he cries. "He was the one who first inhaled the gas and had a tooth pulled. Morton was his student, his partner. Morton stole the idea from him." Wells writes his own pamphlets, pleading his case to the world. "I am the true discoverer," he insists, his voice growing shrill with desperation. The three men are locked in a triangle of hate. They spend their days not in the laboratory, but in the courtroom and the printing press. They pour their wealth into legal fees and propaganda. They become obsessed, unable to talk of anything but the great discovery. The ether has intoxicated them, not with sleep, but with a mania for recognition. Let us follow the saddest thread of this tapestry first. We travel to New York City in 1848. Horace Wells has moved there, trying to escape the ghosts of Boston. But he cannot escape his own mind. He begins to experiment again, searching for a new agent that will prove his superiority to Morton. He turns to chloroform, sweet-smelling, heavy liquid recently discovered in Scotland. Chloroform is more potent than ether. It is also more dangerous. Wells begins to test it on himself. He inhales the fumes alone in his room, seeking the oblivion, seeking the proof. He sits on the narrow cot. He soaks a handkerchief in the chloroform. He inhales the sweet, heavy scent, seeking the comfort of the void one last time. As the anesthesia takes hold, numbing his skin and quieting the roar of his thoughts, he takes the razor and severs his femoral artery. He dies as he lived, under the influence of the vapor, seeking a painless exit from a painful world. He anesthetizes himself to death. In a twist of irony so cruel it feels written by a dark novelist, a letter arrives in New York shortly after his death. The Medical Society of Paris has voted. They have recognized Horace Wells as the true pioneer of anesthesia. The recognition he craved, the vindication he died for, arrives too late to save him. The letter sits unopened, a eulogy delivered to a corpse. The first domino has fallen. Now, the curse turns to Morton. William Morton spends the next 20 years in a fever dream of litigation. He petitions the U.S. Congress for a national recompense, a reward of $100,000 for his gift to the nation. He argues that he gave the Army the tool to save thousands of soldiers in the Civil War. The bill is debated. It is almost passed. But then the friends of Jackson and the ghost of Wells intervene. They poison the well. They cast doubt. The bill fails. Morton loses everything. His dental practice collapses because he is never there. His farm is seized by creditors. He is burned in effigy by his enemies. He becomes a pariah, a man who walks the streets with the wild eyes of a fanatic, grabbing strangers by the lapels to tell them his story. "I am the one," he whispers. "I stopped the pain." We drift to the summer of 1868. New York City is sweltering under a heat wave. Morton is there, still fighting, still arguing with editors and lawyers. He reads an article in the Atlantic Monthly that credits Jackson with the discovery. It is the final straw. His brain, worn down by decades of stress, snaps. He leaps into a carriage with his wife. He demands to be driven to the chaotic, heat-shimmering streets of Manhattan. He is agitated, shouting at invisible enemies. He orders the driver to go faster, faster. He is running from the injustice of the world. The carriage reaches Central Park. Morton suddenly demands to stop. He stumbles out. He runs to the edge of the lake. He collapses on the grass under the shade of a tree. He is burning up. The man who brought cooling sleep to the world is dying of a stroke, his brain on fire. Bystanders gather. They see a well-dressed man writhing in the grass. They do not know who he is. They take him to St. Luke's Hospital. He dies there, never regaining consciousness. He dies penniless, feverish, and largely forgotten by the public that was, at that very moment, sleeping peacefully through surgeries in the hospital rooms above him. The second domino has fallen. Finally, the curse comes for Charles Jackson. The man of intellect, the man who sought to steal the glory, finds that his mind is his own worst enemy. In 1873, 5 years after Morton's death, Jackson walks through the Mount Auburn Cemetery. He finds the grave of his rival, William Morton. The tombstone bears a famous inscription, William T.G. Morton, before whom, in all time, surgery was agony, by whom, pain in surgery was averted and annulled, since whom, science has control of pain. Jackson reads these words. The weight of the stone, the finality of the epitaph, cracks something deep inside him. He begins to scream. He begins to weep uncontrollably. He is found wandering the cemetery, raving. He is committed to the McLean Asylum. Ironically, the same institution where the Ether Dome stands as a monument to the discovery. He spends the last 7 years of his life in the quiet, padded solitude of the madhouse. He has no memory of his science. He has no memory of his geology. He only mumbles about the thief, the dentist, the gas. He dies in 1880, the last survivor of the trio. The ether controversy dies with him. It is a tragedy of almost mythic proportions. 3 men discovered a way to silence the scream of the world. They found the river Lethe. They gave humanity the power to forget pain. But they could not forget. They could not sleep. They were kept awake by the gnawing hunger for immortality. The substance itself, diethyl ether, remains blameless. It is just a molecule. It does not know glory. It does not know greed. It only knows how to bind to a receptor and quiet a nerve. But in the hands of men, it became a poisoned chalice. This chapter of history serves as a somber reminder. The conquest of nature often exacts a heavy toll on the conqueror. To steal fire from the gods is a dangerous act. Prometheus was chained to a rock for his gift. Wells, Morton, and Jackson were chained to their own egos. As we look back at them, let us not judge them too harshly. They were human, they were flawed, they were desperate. But because of their desperation, because of their ambition, we are safe. We lie in our beds tonight, knowing that if we fall ill, if we break a bone, if we need the knife, we will not have to suffer the agony of our ancestors. We will drink from the cup they forged, even though it poisoned them. The storm of their lives has passed. The silence has returned. The ether evaporates into the air, leaving only the memory of the sacrifice. The poisoned chalice is drained, and the world sleeps on, peaceful and oblivious, cradled in the arms of the volatile spirit. The timeline moves forward, carried by the heavy, rolling wheels of caissons and the rhythmic tramp of marching boots. We leave the personal tragedies of Morton, Wells, and Jackson, the poisoned chalice of the individual ego, and enter a tragedy of a different scale. It is the 1860s. The sky over America darkens, not with the vapors of a laboratory, but with the smoke of black powder and burning cities. The nation has torn itself asunder. We enter the blood-soaked fields of the American Civil War. Here, in this crucible of iron and fire, the volatile spirit of ether finds its most poignant, most industrial, and most merciful application. The initial skepticism of the Boston elite has vanished, blown away by the sheer, crushing necessity of the battlefield. There is no time for debate here. There is no room for humbug. There is only the overwhelming tide of wounded men, a river of suffering that flows from Manassas to Appomattox. In the field hospitals, amidst the deafening roar of cannon fire and the low, constant cries of the fallen, the ether sponge ceases to be a novelty. It becomes an angel of mercy. To understand the magnitude of this shift, we must first visualize the nature of the war itself. This was a conflict fought with Napoleonic tactics but modern weaponry. The technological villain of the era was the mini-bala heavy, conical lead bullet that did not merely puncture the flesh, it shattered the bone. When a mini-ball struck a limb, it did not drill a clean hole. It mushroomed, pulverizing the structure of the arm or leg, turning the bone into splinters. There was no setting these fractures, there was no casting them. To save the life of the soldier from the creeping black death of gangrene, the limb had to go. The Civil War was a war of amputation. It is estimated that 3 out of every 4 surgeries performed during the conflict were amputations. In a previous age, this would have been a sentence to a death by shock, or a trauma so profound it shattered the mind. But the soldier of the 1860s had a silent ally that the soldier of the Revolution did not. He had the bottle of sweet vitriol. Picture the scene. It is the aftermath of Antietam, or perhaps the twilight of Gettysburg. The sun has set, but the work has not stopped. The field hospital is a canvas cathedral of pain, a large tent erected in the mud, lit by the flickering yellow glow of kerosene lanterns and tallow candles. The air outside is cool and smells of wet earth and cordite. The air inside is warm, heavy, and smells of sweat, iron, and the overwhelming, cloying sweetness of ether. The surgeon stands at the operating table. He is not the clean, sterile figure of modern medicine. He is a man of his time, wearing a butcher's apron that is stiff and stained with the fluids of a dozen previous patients. He is exhausted. His eyes are red-rimmed with smoke and lack of sleep. He has been standing for 20 hours. He is a carpenter of the flesh, working with a grim, rhythmic efficiency. But he is also a priest of the void. A soldier is brought in. He is young, perhaps 18, a farm boy from Ohio or a factory worker from Massachusetts. He is terrified. He has heard the stories. He has seen the pile of limbs growing outside the tent flap, a grim monument to the day's labor. He grips the edge of the table. He looks at the surgeon with wide, pleading eyes. He expects the torture. He expects the straps. But instead, a hand descends gently. An assistant, often a fellow soldier or a haggard nurse, holds a cone made of newspaper or a simple marine sponge. He pours the clear liquid onto it. The smell hits the soldiers sharp, solvent-like, reminiscent of fermented apples. "Breathe," the assistant whispers. "Just breathe deeply, son. It will be over soon." The soldier inhales. The first breath is choking, a chemical assault that makes him cough. But the second breath is heavier. The third is a wave of warmth. The sounds of the battle, the distant boom of artillery, the shouting of orderlies, begin to recede. They sound like they are coming from underwater. The tent flaps blur. The lantern light stretches into a long, golden ribbon. The fear stops. The war stops. He is transported. He leaves the hell of the battlefield and enters the void of nothingness. He slides into the chemical abyss that William Morton opened for the world. His muscles relax. His grip on the table loosens. He is gone. The surgeon picks up the knife. He picks up the saw. He works quickly, not because he needs to beat the clock of pain, but because there are 1,000 other men waiting in the rain. But he works with a humanity that was previously impossible. He does not have to fight the patient. He does not have to listen to the screams that once haunted the dreams of every surgeon. The silence of the patient allows the surgeon to think, to be careful, to tie the arteries with precision. Ether transformed the field hospital from a torture chamber into a place of genuine repair, but ether remained the stalwart companion of the Union. It was safer. Chloroform carried a dark risk, sudden sniffing death, where the heart would simply stop without warning. In the chaos of the field, where dosages were estimated by eye and pulse, The wide margin of safety provided by ether was a blessing. You could drown a man in ether, and he would likely just sleep deeper. A little too much chloroform, and he was gone forever. So, while the Confederates relied on the sweet, dangerous chloroform, the Union relied on the rough, reliable ether. It was the Yankee workhorse of anesthesia. Let us linger on the sensory experience of the tent. Imagine the sound of the rain drumming on the canvas roof, a relentless, rhythmic percussion. Inside, the only sounds are the hiss of the ether bottle being uncorked, the soft commands of the surgeon, and the heavy, snoring breathing of the anesthetized men. It is a strange, suspended animation, a factory of sleep in the middle of a factory of death. There is a tragic beauty in this scene. The ether sponge acts as a barrier, a shield. It protects the soldier not just from the physical pain of the amputation, but from the psychic trauma of the event. A veteran of the Napoleonic Wars would remember every second of the saw biting into his bone. He would carry that memory to his grave, a nightmare that would wake him screaming for decades. The Civil War veteran, however, woke up in a cot, confused, groggy, looking down to find his leg gone. The loss was terrible, yes. The phantom pain would haunt him. But the trauma of the event, the moment of severance, was stolen by the ether. It was a mercy that preserved the mind, even as the body was broken. We see figures like Dr. Jonathan Letterman, the medical director of the Army of the Potomac, organizing this chaos. He creates the ambulance corps. He standardizes the anesthesia. He ensures that the volatile spirit is available at the front lines, not just in the rear hospitals. He turns mercy into a system. And we see the nurses. Walt Whitman, the great American poet, walked these wards as a nurse. He described the smell. He described the sweet, sickening odor that clung to his clothes, to his beard, to his skin. It was the scent of the borderland between life and death. In his journals, he wrote of the quiet dignity of the anesthetized men, how they looked like statues of marble under the influence. There is a specific moment recorded in the diaries of a Union surgeon that captures the essence of this chapter. It is late at night after the Battle of the Wilderness. The forest is burning. The wounded are pouring in. The surgeon has run out of chloroform. He has only ether left. But the ether is flammable, and he has only a candle to see by. He has to make a choice. Operate in the dark, or risk the fire? He chooses the risk. He places the candle as far away as possible. He soaks the sponge. He prays. The heavy vapors of the ether drift down toward the floor, away from the flame. The soldier sleeps. The surgeon operates, his shadow dancing huge and distorted against the tent wall. The volatile spirit hovers in the room, a ghost of potential destruction, but it holds its peace. The surgery is successful. The fire does not catch. The angel of mercy does not turn into a demon. This generation of menth, boys in blue, and the boys in gray, would carry the scent of ether with them for the rest of their lives. It became a sensory trigger. Years later, walking past a pharmacy or a hospital, a veteran might catch a whiff of that sweet, solvent smell, and instantly he would be back in the tent. He would hear the rain, he would feel the mud, but he would also feel the overwhelming relief of the sponge. The ether was not just a drug to them, it was the smell of survival. It was the smell of the second chance. It was the scent of the moment when the war stopped, if only for an hour. As the war drew to a close in 1865, the practice of medicine had been irrevocably changed. The thousands of field surgeons returned to their civilian practices in small towns and big cities. They brought the ether with them. They brought the confidence of men who had used it under the worst possible conditions. The hesitation of the pre-war era was gone. Anesthesia was no longer a Boston novelty. It was the standard of care. The battlefield angel had earned its wings. It had proven that it could walk through the valley of the shadow of death and bring comfort. It had proven that the volatile spirit could be tamed, harnessed, and used to stitch a broken nation back together, one soldier at a time. But as the 19th century fades into the 20th, the spirit begins to age. The rough, heavy nature of ether, the coughing, the nausea, the flammability, begins to look archaic. New spirits are rising in the laboratories of Europe. The twilight of the vapors is approaching. But before we say goodbye to the sweet vitriol, we must acknowledge its finest hour. It was not in the clean, tiered amphitheater of the ether dome that ether truly proved its worth. It was in the mud. It was in the dark. It was in the hands of an exhausted surgeon, whispering to a terrified boy that everything was going to be all right, while the cannons thundered in the distance. It was there, in the midst of the apocalypse, that the molecule became a hero. We leave the battlefield now. The smoke clears, the tents are struck, the grass grows over the graves at Gettysburg. But the legacy remains. The silence that fell over the field hospital is the same silence that fills the modern operating room. It is a silence bought with blood and sweet vapor, a gift from the darkest hour of the past to the comfort of the present. We arrive, finally, at the slow, inevitable fading of the spirit. The sun begins to set on the era of the volatile vapors, casting long, melancholic shadows across the tiled floors of the modern hospital. For over a century, the rhythm of surgery was dictated by the drop mask of ether. It was a sensory ritual as predictable as the tides, the slow drip, drip, drip of the clear liquid onto the layers of gauze, the rising fog of the heavy, sweet gas, the deep, rattling sleep of the patient. It was the heartbeat of the operating room, a chemical metronome that kept time for generations of healers. From the dusty tents of the Civil War to the gleaming Art Deco hospitals of the 1920s, ether was the undisputed king of the void. But kings do not reign forever. The spirit, for all its mercy, was dangerous. It was a wild, untamed thing. It was explosive. In the dry, static-charged air of a winter operating room, a single spark from an electrocautery device, or even the friction of rubber shoes on a floor, could ignite the vapors pooling around the patient. There were stories, whispered in the corridors, of explosions that shattered windows and burned surgeons. The volatile spirit lived up to its name. It was always on the verge of returning to the fire from which the alchemists birthed it. Furthermore, it was heavy. It clung to the patient like a second skin. Upon waking, the journey back from the ether sleep was often a nauseating ordeal. Patients would vomit for hours, their heads throbbing, the smell of the solvent leaking from their pores for days. It was a rough, jagged re-entry into the world of the living. The ether hangover was a dreaded price for the absence of pain. As the 20th century progressed, the relentless march of chemistry began to offer alternatives. The age of the elegant gases dawned. In the 1950s, scientists synthesized halothane. It was a fluorinated hydrocarbon, non-flammable, sweet-smelling, and potent. It did not explode. It did not leave the patient retching. It was clean. It was modern. Yet its ghost lingers. We must acknowledge that history is not uniform. While the high-tech hospitals of London and New York abandoned the open drop mask, in the developing nations of the world, ether remained a trusted friend for decades longer. In rural clinics in Africa, in field hospitals in conflict zones where oxygen tanks were scarce and electricity unreliable, the bottle of sweet vitriol was still the gold standard. It was cheap. It was portable. It did not require complex machines. It only required a mask, a hand, and the air we breathe. In these places, the spirit continued its work, saving lives in the silence of the bush, a testament to its fundamental, rugged utility. Today, the Ether Dome still stands in Boston. It is a museum now. The wooden benches where the skeptical students once sat are polished and empty. The red velvet chair where Gilbert Abbott slept is still there, behind velvet ropes. The room is quiet. The skylight still lets in the cold New England sun. It is a silent monument to the moment the world changed. If you stand there, in the hush of the afternoon, you can almost smell it, the faint, phantom scent of apples and solvent. You can almost hear the ghost of John Collins Warren saying, "This is no humbug." The molecule itself hasn't changed. Diethyl ether is still C4H10O. It is still the same sweet vitriol that Ramon Lull distilled in the candlelight of the 13th century. It is still the same liquid that William Morton inhaled in his lonely office. Nature does not change its building blocks. Only our relationship with them evolves. But the spirit has returned to the quiet dark. It has done its work. It has bridged the gap between the medieval nightmare and the modern miracle. It rests now in the collective memory of our species, occupying a unique place in the human story. It is the great dividing line. There is the time before ether, the time of the scream, the strap, and the agony. And there is the time after, at the time of the sleep, the peace, and the cure. We live in the after. We are the children of the vapor. As we drift to sleep tonight, let us offer a silent thought to this volatile spirit. Let us remember the courage of the men who first breathed it. Let us remember the relief of the soldiers who first felt it. We rest in a world made gentle by this molecule. We lie in our beds, closing our eyes, confident that the darkness of sleep is a gift, a restorative pause, and not a terrifying void. The bottle is corked. The vapor has dissipated into the upper air, returning to the aether of the gods. The long, strange biography of the molecule is complete. The silence returns. The history sleeps. Good night.